Right now, as you watch this, a narrow strip of ocean the width of about 21 miles is holding the entire global economy hostage. Ships are being turned back. Oil prices are swinging wildly. And one country's calculated gamble to weaponize a waterway just hit a wall it did not see coming. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and what is happening there right now will determine what you pay at the pump, whether your investments stay safe, and whether this conflict between the United States and Iran spirals into something far worse. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what went wrong for Iran, how the U.S. Navy flipped the entire situation overnight, and what 3 specific warning signs you need to watch for in the coming days. Stay with me because this is not just a military story. This is a story about your money, your safety, and the world you live in. Let's rewind just a few weeks to understand how we got here. In late February, the United States and Israel launched a major military strike against Iran. The strike killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the most powerful figure in Iran's government for more than 3 decades. Tehran responded with fury. Iranian forces attacked U.S. military bases across the region, and Iranian leaders turned their attention to something they had threatened for years, but rarely actually used. They targeted the Strait of Hormuz. Within days of the initial strike, at least 3 ships were damaged in the strait. Iran announced that any vessel affiliated with the United States, Israel, or their allies was now a legitimate target. Ships that had been crossing that waterway without a second thought suddenly found themselves in the crosshairs of one of the world's most strategically valuable choke points. Think of the Strait of Hormuz like the door to the world's biggest oil supermarket. Nearly 1/5 of all the oil and natural gas that moves around the planet passes through those 21 miles between Iran and Oman at its narrowest point. Close that door and the global economy feels it instantly. Iran knew that, and for the first time in years, it had the motivation and the justification to actually use that leverage. So what did Iran actually do? They did not formally announce a closure of the strait the way you might announce closing a road. Instead, they issued warnings to commercial shipping. They told ships not to cross. They fired on vessels. They laid naval mines in the water, creating invisible traps for anyone trying to pass through. They used small boats, drones, and submarines to create a wall of risk around one of the world's most important shipping lanes. What Iran was attempting was a classic strategy called a blockade. In plain terms, a blockade is when one country says you cannot come in or go out through this area, and it uses military force to back up that warning. Iran has threatened this before, most recently in 2019 when the United States ended sanctions waivers for Iranian oil buyers. But this time was different. This time, Iran actually followed through. Shipping traffic through the strait dropped by 70%. Energy markets went into shock. Brent crude oil spiked by 13% in a single day. Natural gas prices soared by 50%. Qatar, one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas producers, halted production after its facilities were hit by Iranian drones. Inside the United States, gas prices began climbing every single day since the initial strikes. Crude oil surpassed $100 per barrel for the first time in nearly 4 years. Experts told us this was the largest oil supply disruption in recorded history, 3 times bigger than the Arab oil embargo of 1973. Let that sink in for a moment. 3 times larger than an event that triggered a global recession, gas shortages, and political upheaval across the Western world. That is the scale of what Iran unleashed. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn, and this is what makes Iran's Hormuz gamble backfire so dramatically. The United States did not just sit back and absorb the pressure. President Trump responded with something that no one expected at that scale. He ordered a blockade of Iran itself. Think about what that means. Iran tried to use the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon against global shipping. The United States responded by turning that same weapon back around and pointing it directly at Tehran. The U.S. Navy deployed more than 12 warships and over 100 aircraft to the region. A carrier strike group moved into position with destroyers, cruisers, and an aircraft carrier armed to the teeth. U.S. Central Command issued a clear statement. All vessels of all nations would be blocked from entering Iranian ports. Ships crossing the strait to and from non-Iranian destinations could pass freely, but anything heading to or from Iran was getting stopped. The U.S. Navy did not just make an announcement. They acted on it. By late April, American forces had intercepted or turned back 42 commercial vessels attempting to violate the blockade. In one dramatic instance, U.S. Marines rappelled from helicopters onto the deck of a cargo ship called the Tuska and seized it directly. Satellite intelligence, commercial tracking data, and aerial surveillance worked together to find and intercept vessels even hundreds of miles away from the Gulf. The U.S. was essentially saying, "You want to threaten our shipping? Fine. We will make sure you cannot send a single barrel of oil out of your own ports." Iran called it piracy. The United States called it enforcement of international norms. The reality was somewhere in between, and it was extraordinarily effective at reshaping the entire strategic landscape. If you are finding this breakdown useful, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We track these developments in real time, and the next update could change the entire picture. This story is moving fast, and the difference between being informed and being caught off guard could matter a lot for your decisions in the coming weeks. Now, let's go deeper into what is really driving this crisis, and why Iran made a move that most analysts now say was a fundamental miscalculation. The question everyone is asking is simple. Why would Iran, which knew the United States had far superior naval firepower, try to blockade one of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet? The answer lies in a concept that experts call asymmetric warfare. Iran does not have an aircraft carrier fleet that can match the United States Navy. It cannot win a traditional naval battle against American destroyers and cruisers. But what Iran can do is make the waterway dangerous and expensive to use. By laying mines, by using drone swarms, by deploying fast attack boats in large numbers, Iran could raise the costs and risks of shipping enough to make energy markets panic. The idea was not to defeat the U.S. Navy. The idea was to make the U.S. Navy's job so difficult and so expensive that Washington would eventually back down and offer concessions. Iran was betting that the political cost of sustained conflict would be too high for the United States, especially in an election year. And for a while, that calculation seemed reasonable. President Trump publicly expressed a desire to end the war quickly. American lawmakers from both parties were raising questions about the mission's objectives. Polls showed most Americans disapproved of the military action. Iran looked at that political pressure and concluded it could wait Washington out. But here is what Iran did not fully account for. The United States was also adapting faster than Tehran expected. The U.S. Navy deployed a new system called deck-launched counter-drone drones armed with proximity fuses, which basically means small drones that can detect and destroy incoming threats before they reach the ship. Marines armed with tactical combat vehicles were positioned on the decks of aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships, specifically to conduct counter-drone operations. The Marine Air Defense Integrated System, known as MADIS, combined electronic warfare sensors and Stinger missiles to take down aerial threats. Fighter jets patrolled the skies above the Gulf, ready to strike moving boats with precision weapons. 5-inch deck guns on destroyers engaged small boat threats at close range. Close-in weapon systems, like the Phalanx gun and CRAM missiles, created a last line of defense against anything that slipped through the outer layers. The result was a layered defense network that made Iran's preferred tactics dramatically less effective. Drone swarms that might have overwhelmed a less prepared fleet found themselves targeted and destroyed before they could get close. Small boats that Iran had used to harass shipping in the past were detected and intercepted by aircraft before they could get into position. But the real game changer was not just the technology. It was the strategic pivot from trying to keep the strait open to blocking Iranian ports entirely. By cutting off Iran's ability to export oil, the United States removed the economic benefit of Iran's Hormuz strategy. Remember, the whole point of threatening the strait was to create global energy disruption that would pressure the United States to ease sanctions or make concessions. But if the United States also blocked Iranian oil exports, then Iran was inflicting pain on everyone, including itself. Iran's oil revenue dried up. Its economy, already devastated by years of sanctions, went into a further tailspin. Meanwhile, the United States began exploring ways to keep oil flowing, including a plan for the U.S. Navy to escort tankers through the region and a program to sell insurance for ships traveling through the Gulf. The international community also mobilized. The International Energy Agency agreed to release 400 million barrels of emergency crude, its largest release ever and more than double what it released during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Asian nations like China, India, and Japan, which depend heavily on oil passing through the strait, began drawing from strategic reserves. The market shock that Iran was counting on to force American concessions was being absorbed by coordinated global action. So now we have a strange and dangerous equilibrium. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz in the sense that it has made it risky and difficult to cross. But the United States controls access to Iranian ports in the sense that no ship can enter or leave without being intercepted. Both sides have blockaded each other in different ways. This is what experts are calling a war of blockades, and it is deeply unstable. Every single day, there is a risk that something goes wrong. A ship gets attacked. A U.S. vessel gets hit. A stray missile lands in the wrong place. And if that happens, the entire fragile ceasefire that has kept this from becoming a full-scale resumption of active combat could collapse in an instant. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Iran made a fatal strategic mistake by overplaying its hand with the Hormuz gambit? Or does it still hold enough leverage to force a favorable outcome? Your perspective helps us all see angles we might miss. While you are thinking about that, consider this next piece of the puzzle. The Hormuz situation is not just a military story. It is also a window into the deeper fault lines shaping this entire conflict. The first of those fault lines is the nuclear question. Before the war even began, the United States and Iran were locked in difficult negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. The United States was pushing for a 20-year freeze on uranium enrichment. Iran was proposing single digits, meaning it would agree to limits only for a few years. That is a massive gap. A 20-year freeze would essentially neutralize Iran's nuclear capability for the duration of any deal. A single-digit agreement would kick the problem down the road. And now, after the killing of the supreme leader and the war that followed, Iran's internal political landscape has shifted dramatically. Power inside Tehran has moved toward the hardliners, the most aggressive elements of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is Iran's powerful military political force that controls much of the country's economy, its paramilitary units, and its regional proxy networks. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has publicly committed to keeping the strait blocked and continuing the conflict. Negotiations that do happen are reportedly chaotic, with Pakistani mediators spending more time helping Iranian factions negotiate among themselves than they do with the American delegation. This is not a government speaking with one clear voice. This is a government in internal conflict about what to do next. The second fault line involves Israel. Israel and the United States share a core goal of constraining Iran's nuclear program, but they diverge sharply on what else matters. For Israel, Iran's medium-range ballistic missiles and its network of proxy groups like Hezbollah represent an existential threat. Israeli leaders want those capabilities dismantled, not just contained. For the United States, the priority has been maritime threats, naval forces in the Gulf, and the Strait of Hormuz. An agreement that satisfies Washington might leave Israel feeling exposed. An agreement that satisfies Israel might require an escalation level the United States is unwilling to sustain. That tension between what America wants and what Israel needs is shaping the negotiating room in ways that are rarely discussed in public. The third fault line is China, and this is the one that could change everything. China is one of the largest purchasers of Iranian oil, even under sanctions. Beijing has allowed commercial satellite imagery to be sold to Iran and has provided chemicals used in missile propellants. Intelligence reports suggest China was considering sending air defense systems to Iran, though Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth claimed Beijing assured him those reports were false. Here's the critical point. If China decides to actively help Iran survive the U.S. blockade, it could shift the entire balance of this conflict. Beijing could buy more Iranian oil, helping Tehran survive the economic pressure. It could provide military technology that makes the IRGC more effective. It could veto international pressure at the United Nations. But intercepting Chinese-flagged vessels to enforce the American blockade would risk direct confrontation with a peer competitor, something no American leader wants to face right now. This is a line the United States has not crossed, and it is a line that Iran knows it can exploit. What does all of this mean for where this is heading? There are three scenarios worth watching. The most likely outcome is some form of negotiated settlement that resembles a reworked version of the 2015 nuclear agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which limited Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. That deal collapsed when Trump withdrew from it in 2018, but the basic structure is still the framework both sides know best. Iran would accept some form of enrichment limits. The United States would ease some sanctions. The Hormuz situation would de-escalate as both sides step back from the blockade standoff. This outcome is possible but not easy. The gap between what each side is demanding remains wide. Domestic politics in both countries, with elections coming in the fall, make it hard for either leader to appear to give up too much. And Israel is watching closely, ready to object if the deal leaves too much of Iran's capability intact. The second scenario is a prolonged stalemate that freezes the current blockade war in place. Both sides hold their positions. Iran keeps the strait dangerous. The United States keeps Iranian ports sealed. Global energy markets adjust to the new reality. Oil stays expensive. Shipping reroutes around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to delivery times and costs to every product that relies on those shipments. This is the worst outcome for ordinary people around the world, and it is a scenario both governments might quietly accept as better than the alternative of escalating back to full-scale war. The third scenario is the wild card, and it is the one that keeps military planners awake at night. That scenario involves one mistake, one miscalculation, one incident that spirals out of control. A ship gets attacked inside the ceasefire zone. An Iranian missile accidentally hits a U.S. vessel. A drone reaches a target it was not supposed to reach. The moment that happens, the political pressure on both sides to respond forcefully could overwhelm all the careful diplomacy and re-escalate the conflict in hours. The blockade, which is currently holding the line, could become the flashpoint that ignites everything. Here is what you need to watch for in the news this week. First, watch for any change in the number of vessels being intercepted or turned away from Iranian ports. A spike would signal Iran is trying to increase oil exports through creative means, which could provoke a harder U.S. response. Second, watch for statements from China regarding the blockade. Beijing's position on whether it will help Iran survive the economic pressure is one of the clearest indicators of which direction this conflict is heading. Third, watch for any reports of naval mines being cleared or repositioned in the strait. The mine-clearing operation that the U.S. Navy has been preparing is one of the most dangerous military tasks in the region, and any movement in that process will tell you whether a resolution is near or whether both sides are preparing for the next phase of confrontation. Iran made a bold bet when it decided to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz. The logic was sound in a narrow strategic sense. That waterway is genuinely important to the global economy. Creating risk there should have created leverage. And for a brief moment, it did. Oil prices spiked. Markets panicked. The United States faced political pressure from an anxious public. But Iran miscalculated two critical things. First, it underestimated how quickly the United States could adapt its naval strategy from keeping the strait open to strangling Iranian oil exports at the source. Second, it underestimated the willingness of the international community to coordinate a response that absorbed the market shock rather than yielding to it. The Hormuz gamble was supposed to make Iran stronger at the negotiating table. Instead, it handed the United States a justification to tighten the economic noose around Tehran, in a way that even critics of the war had to acknowledge was strategically coherent. Iran is not defeated. Iran is not surrendering. But Iran's position in this conflict is demonstrably weaker than it was when the gambit began. That is the truth about what happened here, and it matters because the next move in this story will shape everything that follows. The blockades are holding, but neither side can hold them forever. At some point, someone will have to blink or break. The question is whether that moment produces a negotiated peace that both sides can call a win, or whether it produces something far more dangerous. You now have the context, the strategy, and the watch points to understand which direction we are heading, before most people even realize something has changed. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for our next deep dive. We are already tracking the next development in this story, and it could change everything we just discussed. The Strait of Hormuz is not done shaping the world. You deserve to know what comes next.